The morning sun cast long shadows across Nellie's Air Force Base as Range Master Colonel Marcus Thorne squinted through his binoculars at the lone figure on the gunnery range. For 3 weeks, she'd appeared at dawn, requisitioning ammunition with paperwork so pristine it could cut glass. Training exercises, she'd written in neat block letters. But training for what? Lieutenant Commander Kestrel Ghost Nakamura moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd learned to shoot before she'd learned to drive. Her uniform was regulation perfect, her stance textbook flawless, but something about her presence made the seasoned range crews nervous. Maybe it was how she never missed. Not once. Not ever. Thorne had been watching military personnel for 37 years. He'd seen hotshots, show-offs, and genuine talent. But this woman was different. She fired with a methodical rhythm that spoke of muscle memory carved by something far more serious than peacetime exercises. Each shot landed dead center with mechanical consistency that defied human limitations. "Sir," Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at his elbow, clipboard in hand. "The lieutenant commander's requisition requests are unusual." Thorne lowered his binoculars. How unusual? "She's requesting ammunition loads that match classified mission profiles, long-range precision work, the kind of stuff we don't typically train for stateside." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "Also, she's been asking about night vision compatibility and cold weather performance specs." Through the morning heat shimmer, Ghost continued her relentless practice. Her movements were economical, precise, almost ritualistic. She'd fire, adjust, fire again, each shot placed with surgical accuracy at distances that challenged even veteran marksmen. The targets downrange looked like they'd been attacked by a machine, not a human being. "Run her service record," Thorne ordered quietly. "Already did, sir. That's the strange part. She's listed as a logistics coordinator, transport pilot. No combat decorations, no special training certifications. On paper, she's about as ordinary as they come." But ordinary people didn't shoot like that. Ordinary people didn't move with the predatory grace of someone who'd learned to kill with frightening efficiency. Ordinary people didn't requisition ammunition specifications that suggested they were preparing for something far beyond routine training. Ghost ejected her spent magazine with practiced efficiency, the metallic click echoing across the desert silence. For just a moment, she paused, turning toward the observation tower where Thorne stood watching. Even at this distance, he could feel the weight of her gaze, calculating and utterly still. Then she turned back to her targets and resumed firing. Something was coming. Something that required the kind of lethal precision Ghost was practicing with such methodical dedication. And whatever it was, she was preparing for it with the focused intensity of someone who knew that when the moment arrived, there would be no second chances. The question was whether anyone would figure out what she was preparing for before it was too late. The morning briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-flight chatter until Lieutenant Commander Nakamura walked in. Conversations died mid-sentence, replaced by the awkward silence that follows someone who doesn't quite fit the expected mold. She moved to an empty seat in the back, her movements precise and economical, drawing glances that she acknowledged with the slightest nod. "Gentlemen and lady," Major Harrison's voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Today's exercise is reconnaissance and target acquisition over the Mojave Test Range. Standard patrol patterns, nothing fancy." Snickers rippled through the room. The "nothing fancy" designation was code for rookie exercises, the kind of milk runs assigned to pilots who needed easy flight hours or whose competence was questionable. Every pilot in the room knew Ghost had been relegated to these simplified missions since her transfer from logistics. "Nakamura," Harrison's voice cut through the whispers, "you'll be flying chase position. Stay back, observe, try not to get in anyone's way." The dismissive tone hung in the air like smoke from a cheap cigarette. Ghost's expression remained perfectly neutral, but something flickered in her dark eyes, Not anger, but the kind of patient calculation that comes from being underestimated too many times to count. "Copy that, sir," she replied evenly. Captain Jake Bulldog Morrison turned in his seat, grinning with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told he couldn't do something. "Don't worry, Ghost. We'll keep it simple for you. Just follow our lead and try to keep up." More laughter. Ghost nodded politely, her hands folded in her lap with military precision. She'd heard variations of this speech for months now, well-meaning advice delivered with patronizing smiles, suggestions to take things slow, reminders that combat flying was different from hauling cargo. What they didn't know was that Ghost had been flying combat missions when most of them were still playing video games in their parents' basements. Her service record might read Logistics Coordinator, but that was cover for operations so classified they didn't officially exist. The kind of missions where failure meant more than losing points on a training evaluation. "Weather's clear, visibility unlimited," Harrison continued. "Standard communication protocols. Any questions?" Ghost raised her hand. "Sir, what are the rules of engagement if we encounter unexpected contacts?" Morrison rolled his eyes. "It's a training exercise, Nakamura. The only thing we're going to encounter out there is boredom and sunburn." Still, Ghost persisted quietly, "I'd like to know the protocols." Harrison studied her with growing irritation. "There are no protocols because there won't be any contacts. This is the Nevada desert, not a war zone." Ghost nodded once, filing the information away. No protocols meant no restrictions. In her experience, that could be either very good or very bad, depending on what actually happened once they were airborne. As the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out toward the flight line, Ghost remained seated, studying the mission parameters with the intensity of someone preparing for an exam. The other pilots chatted and joked, their confidence built on assumption and routine. But Ghost had learned long ago that assumption was the enemy of survival. The F-16 Fighting Falcon responded to Ghost's touch like a finely tuned instrument, every control input translated into precise movements through the crystalline desert air. She'd flown dozens of different aircraft during her career, but there was something about the Falcon that felt like coming home, sleek, deadly, and utterly reliable when the stakes mattered most. "Phoenix Flight, check-in," crackled Morrison's voice over the radio. "Phoenix 2, good to go," came the immediate response from Lieutenant Torres. "Phoenix 3, ready," added Captain Williams. "Phoenix 4, Ghost's voice was calm, professional, giving nothing away. She flew in the trail position, supposedly learning from the more experienced pilots ahead of her. If they'd bothered to check her actual flight hours, they might have discovered she had more stick time in combat aircraft than the rest of the flight combined. The formation cruised at 28,000 feet, the desert floor spread beneath them like a brown and tan relief map. Ghost kept perfect position, maintaining precise spacing while simultaneously monitoring 6 different radio frequencies and processing the tactical picture developing around them. "Control, Phoenix lead," Morrison's voice carried the relaxed confidence of someone executing a routine training mission. "We're approaching the first checkpoint, all aircraft showing green." "Roger, Phoenix lead, continue as briefed." But Ghost was watching something else entirely. Her radar display showed intermittent contacts at the extreme edge of detection range, contacts that appeared and disappeared with the regularity of aircraft, using terrain masking to avoid detection. The signatures were faint, almost ghostly, but her experience had taught her to trust instruments over assumptions. She switched to a discrete frequency. "Control, Phoenix 4. I'm picking up possible intermittent contacts bearing 270, range approximately 100 miles and closing." The response was immediate and dismissive. "Phoenix 4, control. We show negative contacts in that area. Check your equipment." Morrison's voice cut in, barely concealing his annoyance. Phoenix 4, maintain radio discipline. This is a training exercise. Ghost acknowledged with a simple copy, but her hands moved across the cockpit switches with practiced efficiency. She activated additional sensors, cross-referenced the contacts with known flight patterns, and began building a tactical picture that made her blood run cold. The contacts weren't random. They were coordinated, moving with the precision of a well-rehearsed plan. Multiple aircraft approaching from different vectors, using terrain and electronic countermeasures to mask their approach until the last possible moment. Someone was using their training exercise as cover for something else entirely. Ghost's training kicked in, years of classified operations where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She began easing her aircraft into a position that would give her maximum tactical flexibility while maintaining the appearance of following standard training protocols. The other pilots continued their casual chatter, completely unaware that their routine morning flight was about to become something far more dangerous. Phoenix Lead, we're approaching the target area, Morrison announced, his voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who'd flown this route dozens of times before. Beginning descent to 15,000 feet. Ghost watched her displays with growing unease. The intermittent contacts had solidified into definite aircraft signatures, at least 6 of them, moving in coordinated pairs toward their position. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random, and it wasn't friendly. "Control Phoenix 4, she transmitted on the discrete frequency, keeping her voice professionally neutral. "I'm showing 6 confirmed contacts, now bearing 260, range 60 miles and closing fast. Request immediate authentication." The pause that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. "Phoenix 4 Control, stand by." Morrison's voice crackled over the primary frequency. "Phoenix 4, what's your malfunction back there? Quit cluttering up the radios with ghost contacts." Ghost's jaw tightened. She'd seen this before, the dangerous combination of overconfidence and willful blindness that got people killed. But she also knew that arguing over the radio would only make things worse. Instead, she began making subtle adjustments to her position, easing away from the formation just enough to give herself maneuvering room without triggering questions from her flight lead. Her weapons systems hummed to life, running through abbreviated startup sequences that would have them ready in seconds if needed. "Control Phoenix Lead," Morrison continued, "we're at the target area, beginning simulated attack run." The formation banked left, descending toward the predetermined coordinates where they would practice attacking simulated ground targets. It was a standard exercise, flown by hundreds of pilots over the years without incident. But Ghost was watching something else entirely. The unknown contacts had split into 2 groups, positioning themselves to intercept Phoenix flight from multiple angles. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Someone knew their flight plan, their route, their exact position. Her hands moved across the cockpit controls with the muscle memory of years spent in actual combat. Chaff and flare dispensers armed. Radar warning receiver set to maximum sensitivity. Missile acquisition tones enabled. Everything she could do to prepare without actually declaring hostile intent. "Phoenix 4, rejoin the formation." Morrison's voice carried a sharp edge of command authority. "Stop wandering around back there." Ghost keyed her microphone. "Phoenix Lead, Phoenix 4. Recommend immediate defensive positioning. I'm tracking multiple unknowns converging on our position." The silence that followed was broken by Lieutenant Torres. "I'm not seeing anything on my scope." "Because you're not looking in the right place," Ghost muttered under her breath, then transmitted. "Unknown aircraft bearing 260, range now 40 miles, heading directly for us. This is not a drill." Morrison's response was sharp with irritation. "Phoenix 4, cease your phantom contact reports immediately. There are no threats in this area." But even as he spoke, Ghost watched the contacts accelerate, their radar signatures sharpening as they abandoned any pretense of stealth. 6 aircraft, flying in perfect tactical formation, closing rapidly on Phoenix Flight's position. Someone was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. The first missile launch warning screamed through Ghost's headset with the electronic urgency of imminent death. Her reaction was instantaneous and automatic. Hard left turn, chaff deployment, dive for the deck while her mind processed the tactical situation with the cold efficiency of someone who'd survived similar encounters before. "Missile launch," she barked over the radio, her voice cutting through the morning calm like a blade. "Phoenix Flight, defensive maneuvers now." Morrison's startled voice crackled back, "What the hell?" His transmission was cut short as proximity warnings began wailing in cockpits across the formation. The routine training exercise had just become very real very quickly. Ghost pulled 6GS in a diving spiral, watching her radar display paint the full tactical picture. 6 hostiles, sophisticated aircraft flying in coordinated pairs, armed with modern air-to-air missiles and closing fast. This wasn't some random encounter. It was a carefully planned ambush using their training flight as bait. "Phoenix lead, we need immediate support." Tor's voice carried the tight control of someone trying not to panic. "I've got missile lock warnings all over my scope." "Control, control, Phoenix lead declaring emergency," Morrison finally transmitted, the casual confidence replaced by the sharp focus of someone whose world had just turned upside down. "We are under attack by unknown aircraft. Request immediate assistance." The response from control was chaos, multiple voices talking over each other as the routine morning shifted into crisis mode. But Ghost was beyond listening to radio chatter. Her training had taken over, years of classified operations where survival depended on making the right split-second decisions. She rolled inverted and pulled through, positioning herself behind one of the attacking aircraft. The hostile pilot was good, better than good, but Ghost had learned her trade in places where mistakes meant more than failed training evaluations. Her targeting system locked onto the sleek fighter ahead of her, painting it with radar energy while her finger hovered over the trigger. The aircraft was unmarked, no national insignia visible, flying with the professional precision of military pilots but operating outside any official chain of command. "Phoenix 4 has contact," she transmitted, her voice deadly calm. "Engaging." The AIM-120 AMRAAM left her aircraft with a barely perceptible shudder, its rocket motor igniting as it streaked toward the target at Mach 4. Ghost was already maneuvering for her next shot, her mind 3 steps ahead of the current engagement. The hostile aircraft attempted defensive maneuvers, deploying countermeasures and diving for the desert floor. But Ghost's missile was guided by more than electronics. It carried the focused intention of someone who'd learned to kill with frightening efficiency. The explosion lit up the morning sky like a brief, violent sunrise. "Phoenix 4, Splash 1, Ghost reported, already tracking her next target. Around her, the battle raged with increasing intensity as the surviving hostiles pressed their attack with professional determination. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed Phoenix Flight was just another routine training mission flown by inexperienced pilots. They hadn't counted on Ghost. The desert air filled with the lethal geometry of modern aerial combat as Ghost maneuvered her F-16 through a 3-dimensional chess match played at supersonic speeds. Her radar warning receiver painted a constellation of threats, multiple missile locks, aircraft positioning for advantage, the electronic noise of sophisticated jammers trying to blind her sensors. "Phoenix 2 is hit." Tor's voice carried the controlled desperation of someone fighting for survival. "I'm losing hydraulics, attempting emergency landing." Ghost watched Tor's aircraft trailing smoke as it limped toward the emergency airfield at Nelly's, pursued by two hostiles who showed no intention of allowing him to escape. Her decision was instantaneous. She rolled inverted and dove toward the pursuing aircraft, her targeting system already painting them with deadly intent. "Phoenix 4 engaging multiple bandits," she transmitted, her voice carrying the flat calm of someone operating in their element. "Phoenix 2, continue emergency approach. I'll cover your 6." Morrison's F-16 flashed past her canopy, locked in a turning fight with a hostile that seemed to anticipate his every move. The enemy pilot was good, very good, but Ghost could see the subtle mistakes that would eventually prove fatal. Her AIM-9 Sidewinder growled with target acquisition as she positioned herself behind one of Tor's pursuers. The hostile pilot tried a desperate barrel roll, but Ghost had seen the maneuver coming and compensated before he'd even started it. "Fox 2, she called, launching the heat-seeking missile that would end the engagement. The Sidewinder tracked true, its infrared seeker locked onto the hostile's exhaust signature. The enemy pilot tried everything: flares, chaff, violent maneuvering, but physics was unforgiving. The missile detonated in a shower of fragments that shredded the aircraft's tail section. "Splash 2, Ghost reported, already maneuvering toward Morrison's engagement. "Phoenix lead, break right on my mark." But Morrison was too busy fighting for his life to acknowledge. His aircraft twisted through the sky in a series of desperate maneuvers, each one bringing him closer to the edge of controlled flight. Ghost could see he was outmatched, brave, competent, but facing an opponent with skills honed by actual combat experience. She positioned herself carefully, waiting for the perfect moment when the hostile would be committed to a maneuver he couldn't abandon. Her finger tightened on the trigger as her targeting computer achieved perfect solution. The M61 Vulcan cannon spoke with its distinctive buzzsaw roar, sending a stream of 20 rounds toward the enemy aircraft. The hostile pilot saw death approaching and tried to evade, but Ghost had learned patience from teachers who'd paid for their lessons with blood. The rounds found their target with devastating effect, chewing through the aircraft's fuselage like an angry chainsaw. The hostile fighter disintegrated in a ball of flame and debris that scattered across the desert floor. "Phoenix lead is clear," Ghost transmitted, scanning for additional threats. "Phoenix 4 has Splash 3. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice, shaky with adrenaline and something that might have been newfound respect. "Phoenix 4, Jesus Christ, Nakamura, where did you learn to fly like that?" But Ghost was already tracking the remaining hostiles, her mind calculating angles and distances with the cold precision of someone for whom this was just another day at the office. The surviving hostile aircraft regrouped with the disciplined precision of professionals who trained for this exact scenario. Ghost watched them on her radar display, 3 aircraft moving into a coordinated attack formation that spoke of extensive tactical training and actual combat experience. "Control, Phoenix lead," Morrison transmitted, his voice tight with the controlled stress of someone whose worldview had just been dramatically readjusted. "We need immediate support. These aren't amateur pilots." Ghost could have told him that 20 minutes ago, but there was no point in recriminations now. She was already positioning herself for the next engagement, her mind processing the tactical situation with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd survived dozens of similar encounters. "Phoenix flight Phoenix 4, she transmitted. "Recommend defensive wheel formation. These pilots are using advanced tactics." The response came from Captain Williams, his voice carrying the sharp focus of someone who'd finally grasped the seriousness of their situation. "Copy that, Ghost. What do you recommend?" It was the first time any of them had used her call sign with respect rather than casual dismissal. Ghost noted it, filed it away, and focused on the immediate problem of keeping them all alive long enough to matter. "Stay low, use terrain masking," she instructed. "Don't try to outfight them. We need to survive until reinforcements arrive." But even as she spoke, Ghost was planning something entirely different. The surviving hostiles were good, but they'd made one tactical error that might prove decisive. They were treating this as a standard engagement against routine training pilots, not recognizing that Phoenix 4 was something else entirely. She began a wide climbing turn, ostensibly following her own advice about defensive positioning. But her radar was painting a different picture. The hostiles were positioning themselves for a classic hammer and anvil attack, using superior numbers to overwhelm the remaining defenders. Ghost had seen this before, in skis over places that didn't officially exist, against opponents whose existence was classified at levels that required presidential authorization to acknowledge. She'd survived those encounters by being smarter, faster, and more ruthlessly efficient than anyone expected. "Phoenix 4 is extending," she transmitted, her voice carrying no hint of her actual intentions. Morrison's voice crackled back immediately. "Phoenix 4, maintain defensive position. Don't go off on your own." But Ghost was already committed to a plan that would either end the engagement decisively or get her killed in the next 30 seconds. She pulled her F-16 into a vertical climb, trading airspeed for altitude while her targeting system locked onto the lead hostile aircraft. At 12,000 feet, she rolled inverted and dove toward the enemy formation, her aircraft screaming through the air with the focused intensity of a guided missile. The hostile pilots saw her coming and reacted exactly as she'd predicted, breaking formation to engage what they assumed was a desperate, suicidal attack. They were half right, it was desperate. But Ghost had long ago stopped caring about odds when the mission required results. Ghost's F-16 knifed through the desert air at maximum velocity, diving toward the hostile formation with the focused intensity of a raptor stooping on prey. Her targeting computer painted multiple solutions as she closed the distance, but she ignored the electronic prompts and relied instead on instincts honed by years of actual combat experience. The lead hostile pilot reacted exactly as she'd anticipated, braking hard left while his wingman pulled vertical to gain positional advantage. They were good, very good, but they were thinking tactically when the situation required something approaching desperation. Ghost's first shot was deliberately high, designed to force the lead aircraft into a predictable defensive maneuver. The AIM-120 streaked past the hostile's canopy by less than 50 feet, close enough to trigger every proximity warning in his cockpit, but far enough away to avoid actual destruction. The enemy pilot reacted instinctively, diving toward the deck while deploying countermeasures. It was a textbook response to a missile attack, executed with professional competence by someone who'd obviously survived similar encounters before. But Ghost had been counting on that exact response. Her second missile was already in the air, programmed for a delayed detonation that would place it directly in the path of the hostile's defensive maneuver. The AIM-120 tracked true, its guidance system updated by Ghost's targeting radar until the final seconds of flight. "Splash 4, she reported as the enemy aircraft disintegrated in a shower of debris. The remaining two hostiles abandoned any pretense of coordinated tactics and came after her with the single-minded intensity of pilots who'd realized they were facing something far more dangerous than anticipated. Ghost found herself bracketed by two highly skilled opponents, each trying to position for a killing shot while avoiding the other's missile envelope. "Phoenix 4, we're coming to assist," Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Negative," Ghost responded, her voice deadly calm despite pulling 7GS in a defensive turn. "Stay clear, I've got this." It was a bold statement, considering she was outnumbered 2-1 by opponents who'd already demonstrated professional-level combat skills. But Ghost had advantages they didn't know about. Years of fighting in places where the rules of engagement were written in blood rather than training manuals. She pulled into a vertical climb, trading airspeed for altitude while the hostile aircraft followed, their pilots assuming she was trying to escape the engagement. But Ghost wasn't running. She was positioning herself for a maneuver that would either end the fight decisively or provide a spectacular demonstration of why overconfidence was fatal in aerial combat. At 15,000 feet, she chopped throttles and deployed speed brakes, her F-16 dropping out of its climb like a stone. The pursuing aircraft flashed past her position, their pilots suddenly finding themselves in front of someone they'd been chasing. Ghost's cannon spoke with mechanical precision, walking 20 rounds through the nearest hostile's fuselage. The aircraft came apart like a child's toy, its destruction so complete that the pilot never had time to eject. One hostile remaining. The final hostile aircraft pulled into a climbing turn, its pilot demonstrating the kind of skilled defensive flying that came from extensive training and actual combat experience. Ghost watched the maneuver with professional appreciation. Whoever was flying that aircraft knew exactly what they were doing. Unknown aircraft. This is Lieutenant Commander Nakamura, United States Navy, she transmitted on the emergency frequency. You are ordered to land immediately or be destroyed. The response came in accented English, the voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone who'd made peace with mortality long ago. Impressive flying, Commander, but this engagement is not over. Ghost smiled grimly behind her oxygen mask. She'd heard similar statements before, usually from opponents who were about to discover the difference between confidence and competence. The hostile pilot was good, better than good, but Ghost had learned her trade from instructors who'd written the textbook on aerial combat. She began a patient stalking maneuver, using altitude and positioning to gradually force the enemy aircraft into an increasingly desperate defensive situation. Phoenix Flight Phoenix 4, she transmitted. Recommend you clear the area. This might get complicated. Morrison's voice crackled back. Phoenix 4, we're not leaving you alone out here. Your choice, Ghost replied, already positioning for her next attack. But stay well clear of my engagement zone. The hostile aircraft attempted a desperate reversal, trading altitude for airspeed in a maneuver designed to force an overshoot. But Ghost had seen it coming and compensated before the enemy pilot had even started the turn. Her targeting computer achieved perfect solution as the hostile aircraft crossed her nose at less than a mile range. The shot was so perfect that failure would have required divine intervention. Fox 2, she called, launching her final AIM-9 Sidewinder. The missile tracked true, its infrared seeker locked onto the enemy aircraft's exhaust signature with mechanical precision. The hostile pilot tried everything, flares, chaff, violent maneuvering, but physics was unforgiving. The Sidewinder detonated with the clinical efficiency of modern weapons technology, shredding the aircraft's engine section and sending it tumbling toward the desert floor in a trail of smoke and flame. Splash 6, Ghost reported, her voice carrying the flat calm of someone completing a routine task. All hostiles destroyed. The radio silence that followed lasted exactly 10 seconds before Morrison's voice crackled through the static. Phoenix 4. Jesus Christ, Nakamura. What the hell are you? Ghost was already turning toward home, her mind shifting from combat mode to the equally complex task of explaining how logistics coordinator had just single-handedly defeated 6 professional combat pilots in aerial combat. That conversation was going to be interesting. The debriefing room at Nellie's Air Force Base buzzed with the kind of intense energy that followed genuine combat operations. Ghost sat at the head of the conference table, her flight suit still damp with perspiration, facing a collection of senior officers whose expressions ranged from amazement to deep suspicion. Colonel Thorne leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the table. Lieutenant Commander, your official service record lists you as a logistics coordinator with no combat training or decorations. Care to explain how you managed to shoot down 6 hostile aircraft in 37 minutes? Ghost's expression remained perfectly neutral. I followed standard defensive procedures as outlined in the tactical manual, sir. Major Harrison shuffled through a thick folder of papers, his face reflecting the confusion of someone whose worldview had been thoroughly scrambled. Standard procedures don't typically result in 6 confirmed kills against professional pilots flying advanced aircraft. Professional pilots make mistakes, sir. I was fortunate enough to capitalize on their errors. Morrison, his face still pale from the morning's events, shook his head. That wasn't luck, Ghost. That was. I don't know what that was, but it sure as hell wasn't anything they taught us in flight school. Ghost allowed herself the slightest smile. Different schools teach different lessons, Captain. The door opened to admit a figure who made everyone else in the room straighten slightly. Admiral Catherine Chen, whose presence at Nellie's suggested this debriefing had attracted attention at very high levels. Gentlemen, Commander, Admiral Chen's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. I'll be taking over this debriefing. She took a seat across from Ghost, her steel-gray eyes studying the younger officer with the intensity of someone reading a classified document. Lieutenant Commander Nakamura, your performance this morning was illuminating. Thank you, ma'am. That wasn't necessarily a compliment. Chen opened a folder marked with classification stamps that made everyone else in the room look uncomfortable. Your actual service record makes for fascinating reading. Operation Glass Mountain, the Caldoran incident, the situation in the South China Sea that officially never happened. Ghost's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her dark eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. 63 confirmed air-to-air kills, Chen continued quietly. 17 ground attack missions in contested airspace. 3 distinguished flying crosses that can't be publicly acknowledged because the operations they were awarded for don't officially exist. The silence in the room was absolute. So, Chen concluded, perhaps you'd like to explain why one of the Navy's most experienced combat pilots is masquerading as a logistics coordinator at a routine training base. Ghost met the Admiral's gaze steadily. Because, ma'am, sometimes the most dangerous missions are the ones that look completely ordinary. Admiral Chen dismissed the other officers with a gesture that brooked no argument. Within moments, Ghost found herself alone with the Admiral in the sterile debriefing room, the weight of unspoken secrets hanging between them like smoke. The logistics coordinator cover was necessary, Chen began without preamble. Your real identity is compartmentalized at levels that require presidential authorization to access. The question is whether your cover has been blown beyond repair. Ghost considered this. The hostile pilots knew our flight plan, our route, our exact timing. Someone with access to classified information provided targeting data. Your assessment. This was a test. Someone wanted to see how I'd respond under pressure, whether my combat skills were still sharp after months of playing transport pilot. Ghost's voice carried the flat certainty of someone stating obvious facts. The question is whether it was our people testing me or someone else's. Chen opened another folder, this one marked with classification levels that made the previous documents look like grocery lists. Project Northwind has been monitoring increased activity by several foreign intelligence services. They've been trying to identify personnel involved in certain classified operations. Operations like Glass Mountain. Among others, Chen's expression remained carefully neutral. Your performance this morning will have consequences, Commander. People are going to ask questions that can't be answered with your current cover story. Ghost nodded. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Deep cover operations always ended the same way, either with mission completion or exposure. There was rarely a middle ground. What are my orders, ma'am? That depends on what you want, Chen replied. We can extract you, create a new identity, place you somewhere else where your skills won't attract attention. You've earned a quiet retirement if you want it. Lord. Or we acknowledge what everyone in this building already suspects, that you're not a logistics coordinator and never were. Accept assignment to an operational squadron where your abilities can be properly utilized. Ghost was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of each choice. Anonymity versus acknowledgement, safety versus mission, the comfortable lie versus the dangerous truth. "The hostile aircraft this morning," she said finally. "They'll be back. Maybe not the same pilots, but someone with similar capabilities and better intelligence. Next time they might not be testing. They might be here to eliminate a specific target." Chen's smile was thin and humorless. "Is that your way of saying you're staying?" Ghost straightened in her chair, the gesture carrying all the formality of a military officer accepting a mission brief. "Ma'am, request assignment to an operational squadron with air superiority mission responsibilities." "Granted. Welcome back to the war, Commander." Outside the windows, the Nevada sun continued its journey across an endless sky, indifferent to the human dramas playing out in its shadow. The squadron-ready room fell silent as Ghost entered, her new flight suit bearing the insignia of the 65th Aggressor Squadron, the elite unit responsible for providing realistic enemy air tactics training to Air Force and Navy pilots. Conversations died mid-sentence as seasoned combat veterans processed the presence of someone whose reputation had preceded her by exactly 24 hours. "Listen up," announced Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Voss, the squadron commander whose own combat record included tour over Iraq and Afghanistan. "I'd like you all to meet our new pilot. Some of you may have heard about yesterday's excitement." Ghost took a seat in the back, her presence drawing sidelong glances from pilots who'd spent years earning their reputations through official channels. The difference between acknowledged skill and whispered legend was sitting quietly among them, and everyone could feel it. "Commander Nakamura comes to us from Navy Special Operations," Voss continued carefully, using the bureaucratic language that concealed more than it revealed. "She'll be leading Red Flight in next week's exercises against the visiting Israeli Air Force contingent." Major Tom Reaper Davidson, a pilot whose call sign reflected 15 years of successful combat missions, raised his hand. "Ma'am, with all due respect, shouldn't someone with more experience in the aggressor role lead that flight?" Ghost spoke for the first time since entering the room. "What kind of experience do you think would be relevant, Major?" Davidson's expression carried the easy confidence of someone who'd never been challenged by an outsider. "Well, for starters, understanding how to replicate enemy tactics without actually, shooting anyone down." Quiet laughter rippled through the room. The aggressor squadron's mission was to provide realistic training by flying like enemy aircraft, pushing friendly pilots to their limits without crossing the line into actual combat. It required skill, restraint, and an intimate understanding of foreign fighter tactics. "Interesting point," Ghost replied evenly. "Tell me, how many enemy pilots have you actually faced in combat?" The laughter died. Davidson's confidence wavered slightly. "That's not. The aggressor mission is different from actual combat." "Is it?" Ghost's voice remained conversationally neutral. "Because yesterday morning I faced 6 hostile aircraft piloted by professionals using advanced tactics. They weren't training. They were trying to kill American pilots over American airspace, and they were good enough to nearly succeed." She stood, moving to the tactical display at the front of the room. "The pilots you'll be training against next week will be Israeli Air Force, some of the most experienced combat pilots in the world. They've faced real threats, real missiles, real consequences for failure. If we don't push them harder than their actual enemies will, we're not training them, we're killing them." Colonel Voss nodded slowly. "The commander has a point.